Hey folks, welcome back to Urban Farm Utopia. And today we're going to be making our own pasta sauce and canning it for later storage. So yeah, this is a great thing to do with the extra tomatoes that come out of your garden if you've got a whole bunch of them left over. But I'll be honest, I generally just start with a tomato sauce base. Most of the reason for that is that like the flavor difference between going from a raw tomato and just starting with a plain sauce is not all that different, and processing tomatoes down all the way from the raw tomato is a heck of a lot of work. Takes a lot of tomatoes to get you to a sauce that's thick enough to start working from. Got to condense it down, and that's just kind of a day in and of itself. If you're interested in learning how to do that, we've got another video on that subject where we go from raw tomatoes down to the sauce, and you can watch that first. But today we're just going to start with the sauce. I personally prefer Hunt's. That's just kind of a preference with the flavor profile, but any basic sauce will do. And then also just crushed tomatoes, and that's going to be our base. Crushed tomatoes and plain tomato sauce, and we're going to be building it up from there. So we're going to be making about 3 gallons of that today. That takes 3 of these very large cans and then 3 crushed tomato cans. And then I use just a very basic sauce. So I'll add in onions, some fresh garlic, and then just spice to taste. But you can kind of add anything into it that you want to. Some people put in bell peppers, other people use zucchini, squash from your garden. Any of those types of things is really great to go in your sauce. The only things you can't do, you can't put the meat in it, right? So no meatballs, no hamburger meat, nothing like that. That'll go rancid in the sauce no matter even after you can it. So you want to use fresh vegetables and then tomato sauce itself. So kind of a pro tip to first start. Number one, when you're dicing your onions, if you put a wooden toothpick or a sucker in your mouth, that'll keep you from crying. That's kind of a nice thing to do. And then also, when you start to heat your sauce, kind of one of the mistakes people make is like, okay, I got this big pot of sauce. I want to start heating it up to temperature so I can start mixing in my things and simmer it down. And you don't want to do that because the tomatoes will burn on the bottom of the pot, and it kind of forms these black flake carbon charcoal pieces that'll get into your sauce and kind of really hard, not all that good to eat, and it'll mess with the flavor profile after a time. So you want to bring the sauce up to temperature really slowly and then start to mix your ingredients in. So we're just getting started bringing our sauce up to temp. Once we're ready to go, we'll start adding things in. So we've brought our tomato sauce up to temperature, and if it's your first time making sauce, you've never done it before, kind of don't know what you're getting into, I always recommend like bring up the sauce up to temperature just as tomatoes and get a taste of kind of what you're dealing with. Now there won't be much to it. It'll really just kind of taste like a tomato, but it'll give you the idea of kind of like where you're starting from. And so we're going to be doing heat submersion canning today, not pressure canning. This is where you boil the cans in a bottle in a pot of water. And when you're making tomato sauce, what you're taking advantage of is you're taking advantage of the acidity in the sauce to preserve it, right? The canning keeps it fresh, and the heat sterilization sterilizes it, but what really keeps it preserved is the acidity, right? So the acidity keeps the microbes from going in there, it keeps it from going bad. Tomatoes themselves are highly acidic to start with, but not quite acidic enough to keep it on a shelf at room temperature. So you're going to be wanting to add some citric acid to your recipe. Now, you can get citric acid just at any kind of canning, like in the grocery store section where you have your cans of like your mason jars, those types of things. And 1 hefty tablespoon for a 3-gallon pot is about all you need. Okay, and the other thing with the acidity, though, of course, now the acidity is in there, and acidity just kind of has this really, like almost like an orange to the extreme, right? And so if you're going to be doing tomato, sugar is kind of how you offset that. Sugar is how you offset the acidity in a sauce. So as you're going, if you make your sauce and it's a little too kind of tart for you, just add some sugar. For this big of a pot, we're probably going to be adding a full cup of sugar is kind of our baseline to get us started, and we'll season from taste from there. After that, I like to add the spices. Now, I keep a pretty good spice cabinet. You can add anything in here that you really feel like adding. There's no right or wrong to this. But if you want to follow my specific recipe, I add about a tablespoon of black pepper. Right. And then from there, you're adding thyme and basil, oregano, and you really just, from there, it's just kind of the taste. What do you particularly prefer? I probably add about, I don't know, a hefty teaspoon of thyme and about a hefty teaspoon of basil to it. You can see I'm not measuring this. This is just kind of whatever gets into the pot goes there. In addition to my garlic, I like to add some celery salt. Celery salt actually makes a great substitute if you're allergic to garlic. I was cooking for someone one time and they were allergic to garlic. I'm like, what can I use for a substitute for this? Celery salt is a really good substitute if you're allergic to garlic or don't want particularly the garlic in your food. Some parsley flakes. I don't want to go too heavy on these. Parsley will kind of make it taste a little too much like grass if you add too much of it, but it definitely rounds up the profile. Oregano. And a bay leaf. Now, I don't know if you know this, but there's an old wives' tale that like you put one bay leaf in a pot, and whoever gets the bay leaf is the winner of something. I don't know. It's going to be lucky, I think is the way it goes. But one hefty whole bay leaf in the pot is all you need. A little bay leaf goes a long way. Now then the next question, people always ask is like, when you make a tomato sauce, do you want a wine or not? Now, I personally like to add a little bit of wine to my tomato sauce. Now, how much wine do you add? Kind of up to you. The alcohol, of course, is going to burn off, but this gives you a nice flavor profile. It kind of rounds out and makes it a little bit sweeter. One of the rules with wine is, do you want to use a cheap wine or expensive wine? You don't have to use a real expensive wine, but a rule of thumb is don't put anything in your sauce that you wouldn't just drink out of a glass. So that's kind of a nice rule of thumb there. From there, I'm going to add my fresh garlic. Of course, I'm going to be adding it in. This was a full bulb of garlic that I minced up real fine. And then I'll add, for a pot this size, I'll add 3 full onions diced up. And that will be pretty much what we need from there. Now, of course, we're going to let this simmer for a little while. You don't just bring the sauce up to temperature, cook everything really hot, and then can it. That's not the idea. Those sauces, you want to kind of let simmer. You're going to simmer slow. You're going to let all those flavors mix together and kind of form your flavor profile of your sauce. And it takes some time. I'll probably let this sauce simmer at least an hour, hour and a half. Getting upwards of 2 hours is probably where I want to be kind of, you probably need to go beyond that. But you really want to give the flavors the time to come together, form the sauce that you want to have, and then, taste it from time to time and see, is it what I want to see? Is it too sweet or not sweet enough? If you get it too sweet, you put too much sugar in there, add a little bit more citric acid. That'll make it sour, and vice versa. So I'm going to get started here. We're going to get this thing stirred up, get it ready to simmer, and next step will be on to canning. Hi, welcome back. So we've been able to bring our sauce. Our sauce is simmered for a couple hours now. Everything's tasting really good, and we're ready to start the canning process and getting ready for going to that. So first thing about a canning jar, we're doing submersion water canning today. We're not pressure canning. This is where you fill the pots with water and you put it over the top and you sterilize it with heat. So a canning jar, mason jar, comes in 3 basic parts. Number 1, it comes with the lid itself, and the lid itself comes with this kind of rubber ring on the inside of it, and this is what forms the airtight seal and seals the can once we're done with the process. So you want to make sure that your rubber seal is in good shape. It has no cracks in it. If you've used them before, you can use them multiple times, but if you used it before, you want to make sure that your seal is in good shape. And this goes in a pot of boiling water that softens it up and sterilizes it. The ring itself, you don't need to worry about this. This is what tightens down on the seal, makes the form seal. This will get sterilized through the process. And of course the jars themselves, you put those in a big stock pot, fill it with water, and the goal here is, you're going to sterilize the jars with heat, bring this to a rolling boil before you start the canning process. Now, when you do submerged canning, you're doing a hot-on-hot canning process. What do I mean by that? Well, you're going to take a hot sauce, and you're going to put it into a hot jar, and then you're going to do the canning. Okay? These jars, you don't want to make them cold. If you put a hot sauce into a cold jar, number 1, you could crack them, get glass into your food. That's no good. But more importantly than that, it's just you won't get a tight seal. You also don't want to let your sauce cool before putting it into here, because you're using the heat. As the heat dissipates and the can cools down, that's what forms the vacuum seal. That's what seals it in for freshness. Okay? So I'm going to get my water boiling. Once we get that started, we'll start the canning process. So we've reached the point, it's time to start canning. So before we get started with this, I want to kind of show you our setup that we have here. So we've got our jars boiling at a rolling boil, and we've got our lids boiling at a rolling boil, and we've got our sauce in the background still hot. Okay, and the key to success with canning and submersion canning is organization and coordination. All right, so I brought this up to begin, just kind of show you where we're at. I'm going to move the lids to the back. This is a traditional 4-burner stove, and you don't need a whole lot to do here, but you need to make sure that you have everything organized, or else it can get real bad, real quick, and in a hurry. Okay, so you're dealing with hot liquids. Always be safe. Wear an apron if you can. So basic equipment you want to start with. Okay, I like oven mitts or these silicone gloves. Okay, the beauty of these things is that you can actually reach down into the hot water and be protected. Okay, the silicone is safe up to like 500 degrees. You can reach right down in the boiling water with no problem. Okay. When you buy a candy set, they'll also have these like kind of jar tongs if you want to use these to pull in and out. These I find are really great when you're pulling the final product out, but when you're initially building the jar, I really prefer the gloves. And then of course a magnet for the lids, right? This just lets you reach down the boiling water, pull out the one lid that you want, and start to get started. All right, so I'm going to move my sauce to the front here. And again, this is still hot. It's been simmering the whole time. I'm going to keep it hot while we do the jarring process. Mix it up, get it good. You want to make a nice uniform product. At this point, you know the sauce has been boiling and simmering at the top, so there's a lot of water at the top. The tomatoes kind of settled at the bottom. You want to mix that up and make sure you have like kind of a nice uniform product going into your jars. All right, and then easiest way I've found to do this, of course, you can use the tongs, and like I said, these things are safe. They just grab right at the lid. You can pull them up and pull in, but I just find if you grab the silicone gloves, it's just kind of a lot easier. And I'll just grab straight into the hot water and then pull out my first jar and let the hot water go back into the pot. Now, something about this. Now, every once in a while, it doesn't happen often, but every once in a while, it will actually, like, the glass will actually shatter. If that happens, you know, it's just kind of part of it. But be aware that it is something that can happen. If it does happen, it's not that you've done anything wrong. It's just kind of all part of it. All right, so I've got a canning funnel here, and I'm just kind of ladling in my sauce into the jar. Canning funnel is worth its weight in gold. These work with narrow lipped jars or wide ones, but you're just kind of filling it. And again, this is a hot on hot process. You want to keep everything hot. Temperature differentials are what cause the cracks in the glass. So if you have a cold jar, or if you've let your sauce cool down, that's the easiest way to shatter a jar. Okay, so you want to bring it right up to, I don't know if you can see this in here, but I'm bringing it right up to the rim of the glass. You're going to leave a little bit of space in the top. You don't fill it all the way to the top. That space is really just what creates the vacuum seal. It is the temperature differential that does it. And so I come over here. I'm using my magnet to grab a single lid, right? And this is hot. It has been boiling. And then the ring itself has not been boiling, but that's okay. And you're going to tighten it, kind of hand tight, but you are going to like tighten it. It's not a loose fit on it. And then that, of course, the jar will go straight back in the boiling water as quickly as you can. When you fill your jar up to start boiling your initial jars, you're going to fill them to where the water is just above the lid of the jar. But then as you start to fill, of course, you know, you had water in the jars that you're dumping out. Well, now that's filled with sauce. So the displacement will happen and your water level will rise. I recommend having kind of one of these Pyrex dishes. You can just kind of scoop out the water as you need. These are tempered glass, so it has no problem just reaching right in there. Pull the hot water out as you need to keep everything moving along. So I'm going to finish doing these up, and then we'll go through the full canning process at the end. We filled all our jars, we've got them in the submersion bath, and we're ready to start canning. Let me show you what we have in here. So all your jars are tucked in. I'm doing 7 quarts in this particular 4.5 gallon pot at the time. That's about what fits. Now, you're going to be boiling this for about 45 minutes for a quart. Okay, it takes about 30 minutes to do a pint. It takes 45 minutes to do quart-sized jars. What's happening here is your boiling water is, number one, sterilizing. That's the biggest part. Killing any microbes that you have in there. The seal keeps it all watertight. All right, and then when it eventually comes out, you'll seal. The second part you're doing in here is the most important part is your jars have to be actually submerged. The water itself has to be above the lids to allow the boiling to happen. And what's happening, you're creating a pressure cooker inside those jars. The boiling water heats the sauce inside the jar. The sauce inside the jar itself starts to boil, and then it comes across the top of that lid that has the tight seal, and it creates a little tiny pressure cooker inside of your canning water. All right. So if you don't have the cans fully submerged, that seal won't happen, your sterilization won't happen, your pressure won't happen. The water has to actually come over it, and again, 45 minutes, so you need to make sure you have enough to go through the whole 45 minutes. They need to be submerged the whole 45 minutes that are in there. Okay? You want a rolling boiler here. This part is not a simmer. I've got my water at high, forming a lid, and 45 minutes we'll be ready to go. Alright folks, we're in the midst of our canning process. I just want to show you what you're looking at in here. So our cans are at a full rolling boil, okay? This is not like you're starting to see some bubbles. This is a full rolling boil, 45 minutes totally in there. And what's happening here is your sauce is boiling inside those jars, forming little tiny pressure cookers, and that's what sterilizes it, and that's what creates the tight seal when we bring it out of the hot water. We've reached the end. We've done 45 minutes in the submersion bath, and we're ready to pull out our cans. So this is where your tongs really come in. Again, there's nothing really secret to this, but just kind of be careful. They are heavy at this point. Grab them by the lid, bring them out, and your goal here, of course, is to just put them down. And what will happen here is that now that they've been boiling for 45 minutes, your sauce inside is really hot, and they'll do the pressure sealing at this point. So as the jar cools, if you remember from your high school physics class, a hot liquid will condense down when it cools down. Same concept. The hot liquid will cool in, will form the vacuum seal. That little bit of air we left at the lid will kind of condense, and it'll seal that lid down. And as they cool, you're going to hear them pop. They'll just kind of do this little like dink. And what will happen there is if you look at the top of the dome here, the top of the lid will kind of form this little dome. And then as it goes, you just heard it. It'll kind of cool down and then vacuum seal in. And at that point, you're ready to go. And it'll be safe to keep for months and months on the shelf. Just on our first batch of canning here, done in the large quart-sized jars. And of course, this is really great for pasta sauce and those types of things. But I'll be honest, I like to do mine in these little tiny jars. These are half-pint jars. They're the wide rim half pints. And these are great because they're kind of like single serving. Right? So you can pull these out, you want to have pasta, you're just cooking for yourself that night. You take one of these, you put it in your jar, and this is like a perfect little serving by itself. And you can do a heck of a lot more than these than the 7 you can do at a time. Right? So if you're going to get into these jars, I highly recommend. They come with these little kind of racks that you can stack on top. So you'll do a whole layer of jars at the bottom, set one of these on the top, then the jars can sit, and you sit 5 at a time. You do a layer, 5 jars, another layer, 5 jars, and you can do a whole bunch of these at a time. Maybe about 16, 17 at a time you can do of these. So that's what we're going to do up next. We're going to show little kind of single serving jars instead of the big jars. So we're going to start jarring in the small jars here, and it's the same basic science, but it's a little different process with how we do it, just because you have to kind of pull all the jars out at once so that you can stack them on top of one another. But again, same basic science. So you're doing hot on hot canning here. So you got to move kind of quickly. And this is really where the jarring tongs come in handy, because you can just kind of pull them all out of the hot water, get them all lined up, and then we'll bring our sauce over and we'll start filling, and then we'll stack them back on top of each other to do the heat submersion canning process, just like we did with the quart jars, except in small quantities and many of them. So submersion process, and with these particular, you submerge them in layers. So we're kind of just laying down a layer, and then we'll have one of those little racks that goes on top. And these are really nice. Like I said, they're nice because they provide kind of single serving sauces. These are really great for things like pizzas. or if it's just you and you don't want to cook for like a whole bunch of people, these are really nice. And you lay down a layer of jars. Then you use one of these little racks that come on top. And what the racks are really doing is they're just giving room for kind of the jars to bubble, essentially, right? Because you got to have the boiling to go around them, and it just kind of creates the necessary space around the jars. Our layer of the small jars, we've got 3 layers in there. They're ready to go ahead and start submerging canning, and these particular ones you can do for 30 minutes. They don't need to go as long. Smaller jars, but same basic science involved. So we'll bring it up to a rolling boil, 30 minutes, and we'll be ready to go. We finished our small jar canning here, and it's time to cool them off. And I have one of these little racks, which is really nice. You can just like stack them on here. It allows them to cool in layers instead of having to spread them out over a countertop. But same basic process here. You're gonna let them cool overnight. The lids will pop into place. You can hear them going there, and that's how you do it. You have a good seal. And when you go about and you're like, okay, do I have a good seal? You just kind of run your finger over the top. If the lid is concave down into the jar, then you have a good seal. If it's kind of still popped up, you didn't get a good seal. If you didn't get a good seal, it's not the end of the world. Just put it in the fridge. Use it like you would an open container that you buy from the grocery store. Everything's good to go. But if the lids pop down, you have a tight seal. They can be put on a shelf, kept at room temperature for a very long period of time. Years is usually the timeline that you have there. So I hope you've enjoyed this canning process. I hope you've learned a lot. If you have any questions, shoot me a comment down in the comments below, and we'll see you next time here at Urban Farm Utopia.